Okay, hello and welcome to our author spotlight on Zoom. My name is Deborah Keener and this is my colleague Emily Van Allen. And we are so excited to virtually welcome you here tonight with us. Before we begin, just a few things to take note. Please keep your mics muted during the interview. We will give everyone an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the interview. Please use the chat box if you're on Zoom, and in the audience we'll come down and have you ask questions on the mic. We encourage you all to check our website and calendar for all our upcoming events. We would like to thank our director, Chris Mara, and assistant director, Tony Iovino, as well as our board of directors and our fantastic colleagues for giving us this opportunity tonight to offer these programs to the community. We could not do that without their support. So Emily will introduce our guest.
All right, so Laura Spence-Ash's debut novel, Beyond That, the Sea, was published by Celadon Books in March 2023. Laura was named one of the 10 writers to watch in spring 2023 by Publishers Weekly. The novel was chosen as a Good Morning America Buzz Pick, an Indie Next Pick for April 2023, and has received a starred review from Publishers Weekly. She was the founding editor of Craft, an online literary journal, and she has taught from Rutgers University, the Princeton Adult School, and One Story. She earned her MFA in fiction from Rutgers Newark, where she received the Presidential Fellowship, and she lives in New Jersey.
Thank you very much, everyone. Laura Spence-Ash. Oh, can you hear the applause?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I will tell you that your novel was our November book pick. So we did have a very lively book discussion on it the other night. So I do have a few people on Zoom here tonight that were part of that discussion. So we're just going to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what inspired you to become a writer.
Okay. I wrote in college and thought that's what I was going to do. I thought I would move to New York and get a job in publishing and write the next great American novel. It didn't happen. This was the early 80s. We were in a recession. There were not that many jobs in publishing, and those jobs that I could find were, I could barely pay my rent with. So I ended up going in a different direction. I worked for a couple of years, and then I went and got an MBA, and I worked in finance and research, mostly for television, for CBS for a long time. But writing was that thing that was always like in the back of my head, that thing I was going to get back to. I think so many of us have that thing, right? That thing that we say, okay, one day I will do that. I will get back to that. And it wasn't until my parents died, actually. My father died in 2007 and my mom died in 2012. And those were both very much wake-up moments for me, as I think they are for a lot of people. Like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And writing was that thing. That was the thing that had always been there. And so I started to more seriously think about that and take classes and get involved in the writing community in New York. And then I did go, as you mentioned, I did go and get my MFA. And because I got this fellowship from them, I was able to do that full time. I was able to quit my job and go and do that for 2 years. I taught at Rutgers while I was getting my MFA. And that was wonderful. That was life-changing, because writing had always been something, and again, maybe this is something that is familiar to people, had always been that thing that I kind of hid. Like many people in my life did not know that I wrote because I was so, I lacked so much confidence in my writing skills, and it was just something I did kind of by myself. But once I was doing this program and this was what I was doing full time, I had to kind of own it and admit and say, like, yes, I'm learning how to be a better writer. So I did that. Now, this novel specifically, I had read an article in 1998 in the New York Times that talked about a group of older British adults who'd come back to the States to see where they had been during the war. And when I read that, I had no idea that children were sent to the States during the war. I knew, of course, that children were sent to the countryside, right? That's what Narnia is based on. And I think there are other stories in our that we all sort of know about the children leaving London and being sent to the country, but being sent so far afield and often alone, right, was something that just really struck me. My children were young then. They were 1 and 5 when I read that article, and I just couldn't imagine making that choice. And so I wasn't really writing then, but it just captivated me, and I read everything that I could find about it. And then I read a memoir by a man who had been sent with his brother to a town south of Boston. And it turned out completely coincidentally that that was the town that I lived in when I went to high school. And in fact, he and I went to the same school. He was there as a day student and I was there as a border student. And obviously our experiences were very, very different. I was not there during a war. But it was the first time I'd been away from home, and there was something, and I could feel what he felt about being in that place and being so far from family and missing home. And once I had that, I just kind of built the book out of that feeling, out of that place, that town south of Boston. So I started the book in around 2008, 2009, something like that. Did not work on it continuously at all, kind of would work on it and then would shove it away for months, even years. But I kept going back to it. And I just couldn't walk away from it. And so after I finished my MFA, I decided I needed to return to that. And so that's really when I wrote the book the way pretty much it is now, was in the 2018, 2019, and then sold it in 21 and it came out in 23. So that's sort of a little bit about my life as a writer and how I came to it sort of later in life. Yeah, a little bit about this book.
That's great. I have to say, the fact that that feeling stayed with you for years and you knew you had to go back and write this book, really, that's so important because it struck you, that feeling. So I will say at the beginning of the book, as a mom myself, it is the one thing that stayed with me through the entire book. As a mom, how could I make that choice? Would I make that choice? So I can see how that's something that really like sat in your heart all those years, and you had to get it on paper.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and congratulations on getting this debut published. It's so emotional, so tender. I can't imagine what you were feeling when you got the notice that it was going to be published.
How did
Yeah,
that
it was crazy. It took me a long time to get an agent. You have to get an agent before you can go to a publisher, and it took me about 1.5 years to get an agent, although I did start querying agents in February of 20, which in hindsight, note to self, don't query agents before a global pandemic hits. So not great timing on my part. But then once I got an agent, the book was sold in under a week after she sent it out. It was really amazing. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's
amazing.
So there are so many themes in this novel: family, friendship, death, grief, resilience, love, trust. What theme was at the forefront of its creation for you as you were writing it? And what theme came to you as a surprise when you finished the novel?
That's a great question. So I think when I started, I really saw this as Bee's story. I was really thinking of it from her perspective and thinking about what it would be like for a child to cross the ocean and to become part of this family, and then to have to return and somehow stitch her life back at home back together. And as I wrote, and as I wrote sort of unsuccessful drafts, I wrote a couple times, got to about page 100 and then kind of put it away and then started again. I think I slowly began to realize that this was not, Bee is the spine of the story, absolutely, but that it's really is a novel about family. And so that's when I decided, the original drafts had just Bee was the only narrator. She was the only point of view voice. And I as I began to realize it was a novel about family, that's when I decided I had to have 8 points of view, so that we could hear from everybody in both families about the impact of this decision on everyone in both families and on everyone over time. So that was a surprise, and it was so wonderful to finally figure that out, because I think that's partly why it wasn't working, why I hadn't quite figured out the right way to tell a story. And once I decided to tell it through the 8 points of view with the shorter chapters, that's when it kind of clicked. And that when I talked about writing it in like 2018, that was when I started writing it in that way, and it just clicked at that point.
And you know, that's one of my favorite parts of the book, is that there are multiple points of view, so that you get to see what the other characters are feeling and what they're thinking. And it really is how life is. There's, you know, you're the main character in your life, but there are other people around you that do shape your story. So it really, you see it in the novel. You see how everybody had a role in Bee's life, and I thought that was a perfect way to put this book together. So let's talk about research for a bit. This takes place from 1940 into the late 60s. You cover history from World War II to the JFK presidency. What resources did you use to help you with the research for all the time periods?
So when I started, I did quite a lot of research, which is really about the Blitz, about domestic life in London, because some of those early drafts, I spent much more time before Bee leaves with the family than them making the decision to send her. There was a lot of that that I kind of got rid of. So I did quite a bit of research there. I love doing research. I could just do that all day, every day, and never write a word. I would be very happy. But I also realized that I would never get the book done if I allowed myself to do that kind of research. And so the year that I wrote the book, in this format, in the shorter chapters, I was taking this class, and I had to turn in pages. And so I really didn't have the time to do the kind of research I had been doing before. So I had told myself I had to focus on the writing, and then I would go, so I did sort of deep dives when I would get to a new kind of moment in time. And I would kind of do some deep dives and get some information, because part of the wonderful thing about doing research, right, is that you find out these little things that just can help enrichen a story. The chess is an example of that here. I did know a little bit about postal chess because my son had played competitive chess, and he played postal chess with somebody in our family. But I was researching what the actual postcards would have looked like at that time. And that's when I found out that they were often either redacted or destroyed because they thought it was some sort of code during the war. And I just thought that was like the coolest thing. So of course that had to go in. But it's like that sort of little details that are so wonderful. And I just love doing research for that. But yes, I spent a lot of time in the library. I did go to London, again, because I did so much research early on, but I went to a number of the historical museums in London to do some of that research. I spent time in the town in Massachusetts, to sort of remind myself what that was like.
Wow, that's great. I love hearing the process and how you put the
Yeah.
story together, because there's so many great, because again, you know, what you just said about the chat, I didn't know that.
I didn't know it either. I thought that was a really interesting part in the book.
Want to take this one?
Yeah. So speaking of locations now, you traveled to London to do some research. Did you have a favorite spot in London at all, or?
You know, I love London. I did love this. It's the War Museum in London. They have, they had, I don't know if they still have, a wonderful exhibit about domestic life during the Blitz. And that was really so wonderful. I'd seen a lot of stuff online, like a lot of the posters that were around town, because one of the things that happened was in 39, 2 million children were almost within 3 days, I think, they got them out of London. It was amazing because they thought in 39 when war was declared that the Germans would be coming, but then the Germans didn't come, right? And so all these children started coming back to London. And so there was this huge campaign in London, all these like mothers, like, leave your child where she is, where he is. Do not bring them back. But in fact, many children came back, and they were never again able to sort of energize the community to get as many children out in 40 when the Blitz actually began than they did in 39, sadly. But yeah, it was wonderful to sort of see that and just to walk kind of everywhere through London where I went to outside the Grosvenor Hotel where she had gone. I also love looking at photographs. There were just so many photographs that I just was able to find online of what London looked like at that time when she left, and then also when she returned in the 50s.
So going back to more locations, the Gregorys are attached to their summer home in Maine, where even after they sold the house, the Gregorys keep returning to it with fondness. Did you grow up in Maine, or do you have a fond memory of Maine from one point in your life? Like, where did Maine come from?
Yeah, so I mean, I love Maine. Both my kids went to camp there, so we spent, some time picking them up and dropping them off. But Maine was pretty much all, and we've been there a few times over the summers, I guess, but Maine was pretty much all fictional. I knew that I wanted them to have an island of their own. I wanted that sort of metaphorically for the family. And I knew that Maine was a place that has a ton of little islands, right? And that in the early 20th century, which is when Nancy's family bought the island and built the house, that it would have been possible without an extraordinary amount of money, right? That this was a doable thing to do. It's not like today. And that's Maine, because Maine has so many little islands, it's relatively common there. And so it made sense to be there rather than kind of anywhere else along the eastern seaboard coast. So for all those reasons together, I did have a few things I could draw on that weren't Maine specific, but the idea of being on an island. My sister for many years, she still lives in Lake Placid, but for many years she lived in Lake Placid, like out on the lake, and you could hike out or you could take the boat out, and we always took the boat out and back. So I had that sense of what it's like to live somewhere removed like that. And, if you forget to buy milk, that becomes like this huge thing of getting to the store. And then my family, my father was an academic, and so we went to Martha's Vineyard every summer for a month. So I had that to draw on too, what it's like to sort of pack up a family and go someplace for an entire month. So, little bits of both of those I think are in there, but the house and the island is it's just all fictional, and it was great fun kind of creating it out of whole cloth.
It's actually fascinating to me that it's fictional, that you didn't have that to draw from. We were discussing this last night, how we felt like there's something from your childhood, whether it's a place or a smell, that brings you back. And I feel, we all felt in the book that was Maine for the Gregorys, for B. It was that perfect place away from everything that brought them back, their happy place. So the fact that you
Right.
draw on it is wonderful, because that resonates with everyone. There's a smell, a place, a piece of clothing. Everyone has that. So you really touched on that, and it was perfectly done. So, were there any parts of the novel that you decided to omit from the story?
Like with draft writing, there's tons and tons and tons of draft writing.
Right. So as I said, there was a lot of stuff before she left, making that decision to start the book sort of after the decision has been made. That came later. So there was a lot of stuff before that happened. But once I started writing, once I made that choice and the choice to have the 8 points of view, there wasn't a lot that was eliminated after that point in time. I really hadn't, even though I'd gone through like a number of drafts, I'd written a lot about the 40s and I'd written some about the 50s. I really had not written about the 60s until I did it over the course of that year when I was writing in the shorter chapters. And most of what I wrote, I think, ended up staying. I think we cut with my editor, I think we cut a few things, but there was nothing crucial, nothing that would have changed the story shape in any way.
Do you have, aside from B, do you have a favorite character?
This is so, it's like, do you have a favorite child? It's a hard question. I loved writing Rose. I mean, Rose is somebody who, maybe probably shouldn't even be there because she's not really a member of the family, but she was such a joy to write, and I so enjoyed spending time with her and doing the research for her, right? Thinking about the Kennedys and what it was like to be a woman in that position in the early 60s was just super fascinating to me. And I loved like how her arc developed and what happened to her after William died. Like there were just so many wonderful things. And so she may be close to my heart after B. Millie is another one that Millie changed a lot over time, over the drafts. Like when I first started, I think there was a little bit of good cop, bad cop with her and Nancy. But I think too much, right? I think it was too much. And I think I judged Millie. Like I couldn't quite understand perhaps her jealousy and her anger and her envy. And I judged her for that instead of understanding that. And the more drafts I went through, the more time I spent with her, the more I understood. So she definitely softened. And I also was very keen on making sure that she had an arc of her own and that things changed from the beginning to the end for her.
I have to say, I really loved that Rose was not made to be a villain at all or the other woman. She was made to be her own strong character. And I really enjoyed ending that book on such a great note with Rose.
And I have to say, for me, Millie, it was the character because from the beginning, where spoiler alert, but I'll leave it from the beginning that because she didn't want to make the choice to send B away, and it really was Reginald who forced the issue, and she lived with that resentment. And it's throughout the whole novel that she tries to repair this because B really, she felt it was her mom that did this to her. So as a mom, as we said at the beginning of the discussion, could I ever make that choice? And Millie didn't want to make that choice.
Right.
So when you said that you judged her and then you came to an understanding, I get that because you don't want her to be the bitter mom. But at the same time, it's almost like she lost her motherhood with her daughter.
Right, exactly.
Away from her. So I could see her being jealous of Nancy because Nancy was able to give her that happy life that in her mind, I think every mom's mind, you think, or you at least want to give that to your child. So really, like she broke my heart a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So if this novel was ever made into a movie, who would you want to play B?
So I love Saoirse Ronan.
Yeah.
I can totally see her in this role. The older B. I mean, I think they'd have to have two casts, right, if they ever did this. But yeah, I could totally see her playing this role. And she's actually right now in a movie. I can't remember the name of it. Maybe it's called Blitz. That's about being a mother during the Blitz in London. Yeah.
Oh wow.
We haven't seen it yet, but
okay.
And what about William and Gerald?
I don't have any suggestions. Did any of you come up with good ideas? I can't ever.
I mean, Ryan Gosling would always come to mind.
Ryan
I don't know. I mean, if he could play Ken, he could play anything. I don't know. I don't know a lot of the younger actors right now.
I think it has to be someone a little bit less Hollywood and more like plain Jane, however you say that in boy form.
So less Hollywood and a little bit more plain,
Like-
plain Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love to see a movie of this.
Yes.
Yes.
So our audience is saying they would love to see a movie about that. I think it would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So before we take other questions, we just wanted to talk about you a bit. What are you currently reading?
So I just finished the new Sally Rooney, which is very good. I'm a big Sally Rooney fan. I've read all of her books. So that was wonderful. I just started, so I can't, but I started Orbital, which just won the Booker Prize by Samantha Harvey. And that is fascinating. It's 24 hours in the International Space Station. So you travel around the world with the people in the space station, and the point of view jumps from one member of the crew to the other as you,
Oh, wow.
you move around the world. It's fascinating. It's beautifully written and really wonderful. And oh, I know, I don't know, but Our Narrow Hiding Places by Christopher Jansma, also historical fiction. It's about the hunger winter in Holland right at the close of the war. I really didn't know that much about the hunger winter at all, and it's dreadful what the Germans did to the Dutch. And it's actually based on Christopher's grandmother was there, and so he used a lot of the information he got from her in the book, but it's really a wonderful book.
What is that book called?
What was the book called?
Oh, it's called Our Narrow Hiding Places.
What was the Sally Rooney book called?
Was it intermittent?
Yes, Intermezzo.
Intermittent.
Intermezzo, yeah.
Close enough.
Which is it's also about chess. It's about two brothers who have right at the start of the novel, they lose their father. And so it's also a book that's a lot about grief. But one of the two brothers is a professional chess player. Is that the word?
Right.
So there's a lot of chess, and a lot of the idea of the strategy of chess is like throughout the book.
Oh, nice.
So what's next for you? Are you currently working on a new novel? Do you see a sequel for this book in the works?
I do not see a sequel, not now anyway. I'm working on two separate projects. One is I have a number of short stories that I worked on in my MFA. So one is a collection of short stories, but as we perhaps all know, they don't sell very well, which is really too bad because I think more people should read short stories. I love them. So I'm working on that, but I'm also working on a novel that takes place in the late 60s. So again, I mean, I don't really think of myself as a historical fiction writer because I think my focus is always on the characters rather than the time period. And this one too it happens to take place in the late 60s, but it's very much about a young woman, a sort of coming of age story about a young woman in New York.
Oh, very interesting. So I'm going to go into the audience and take some questions. So give me 1 second. I have to run off the stage.
Hi. Can you hear it?
Hello? Hi, okay. You can hear me?
Can she hear?
Yes, she can.
Okay.
Okay, I honestly read the book, it was maybe almost a year ago, I think January, for some reason, that sticks in my head. And I recommended it to my coworker and her family, as you see sitting here. We're all sitting here and we all recommended it because of what I read. I don't even remember who recommended it to me, but I just thought it was such a beautiful, beautiful story. The themes, the characters, I don't think that there was a single thing that I didn't like. The relationship building, I felt completely immersed. I was very sad that it was over. I couldn't believe it was your first book. I just thought it was, and it was a time period I didn't know a lot about. It was a situation, the theme of the book is something I did not know a lot about. I've read a ton of Holocaust books. I was relieved it wasn't that. And it was not, I mean, it was so much that I liked the question about the themes, because I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Like all of them were very accurate and very true. So I just think it was so beautiful, so personal. Like it felt like it was really your story. And I really just loved it. So I just wanted to say that. I don't really have a question.
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Are there questions in the chat box, Emily?
I'm checking now. No.
So no, there's no questions in the chat box, but what we usually do to end our author spotlights, we do a lightning round. If you're willing to play the game with us,
Sure.
we put 60 seconds on the clock and you have to answer as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so Emily's putting 60 seconds on.
Let me get this timer going.
Okay. Okay, ready? Here we go. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Peacock, Disney Plus, Apple, or Max?
I'll go with Max.
Max. What are you currently binging?
Say Nothing on Hulu.
Oh, okay. What's your favorite snack or cocktail?
Don't drink popcorn.
Popcorn. What character of a book, not yours, or TV, movie, series would you like to have dinner with?
Oof. I would say Joe March from Little Women.
Oh, wow. Favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Yay.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Morning bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Print or audiobook?
Both. But I'll
just
say print.
Okay. Well, Laura, it has been a real pleasure to have you here tonight. You were our first virtual author in our new theater, so that's very exciting for Emily and I, and our audience here they enjoyed the book. We enjoyed the book. We hope that when you finish your next novel, you will come back, maybe in person. New Jersey's not that far from
No,
Oceanside.
it's not.
Yes.
I would love to. Thank you. And thank you again so much for having me. These were wonderful questions.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you again, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone online too. We see you.
We see you. Thank you again. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.